picture this, if you will. The year is 1986. We're in New York City, the absolute epicenter of the financial universe.
The go-go 80s.
Exactly. And we're inside one of those boardrooms you always see in the movies. You know, the kind dark wood-paneled walls, high ceilings, probably a view of the skyline that costs more than most people make in a lifetime.
Right. It smells like old money and serious decisions.
And it's an investor roadshow. So the room is just jam-packed with investment bankers.
The masters of the universe.
That's the crowd. And if you know anything about investment bankers, especially in the mid-'80s, you know they are not an emotional bunch. They are stoic. They are skeptical.
You've seen it all. Or they think they have.
Right. They're there to look at the numbers, to find the holes in your logic, to basically tear your business model apart and then move on to the next deal. They don't do feelings.
No, applause is definitely not part of the protocol. It's usually a very dry, grilling kind of affair. You present, you get interrogated, and you leave sweating.
But not on this day. At the front of the room is a man named Richard Scrushy. He's young, he's full of energy, and he's pitching a healthcare company. He talks for about an hour. He's weaving this narrative, not just about a company, but about the future of medicine in America.
So he's a showman.
A complete showman. And when he finishes his speech, he steps back from the podium, and something just unprecedented happens. These stoic, stone-faced bankers, they stand up.
Where they stood up.
They stand up, and they give him a standing ovation.
At a road show. That is,
yeah.
I mean, that is almost unheard of. I've been to my share of these, and the best you can hope for is a polite nod and maybe a follow-up meeting.
I mean, bankers don't clap, let alone give a standing ovation. It just doesn't happen.
No.
The company's CFO at the time, a guy named Aaron Beam, said that one of the bankers came up to him afterward and told him he had literally never seen a reaction like that in his entire career. He said Scrushy had this remarkable magnetic ability to sell a concept. He wasn't just selling stock, he was selling a belief system.
And that image, that standing ovation, it really tells you everything you need to know about the roller coaster we are about to go on.
It really does.
It's a story about charisma, absolutely. But it's also a story about how that charisma built an empire, and then how it was used to hide one of the largest, most audacious corporate frauds in American history.
But here's the kicker. Usually when we do these deep dives on massive frauds, think Enron, think WorldCom, the company just disappears. It goes to zero. It becomes a footnote in a business textbook.
A cautionary tale.
Exactly. But the company Richard Scrushy was pitching that day, it's still here. And in fact, it's huge.
That's right. Today, we know it as Encompass Health.
So today on the Deep Dive, we are unpacking the wild, tumultuous, and frankly, the surprisingly resilient history of Encompass Health, formerly known, of course, as Health South.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here before we get into all the drama, Encompass Health, which is based in Birmingham, Alabama, is currently the nation's largest provider of inpatient rehabilitative services.
The largest in the entire country.
We're talking about a massive network. They have 166 inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. They're operating in 38 states and Puerto Rico.
Wow.
They employ roughly 40,000 people. And as of this year, 2024, they're pulling in over $5.3 billion in revenue.
So this is no small operation. This is a titan of the healthcare industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to really trace the life cycle of this corporate giant. We want to understand how a really smart business idea in the early 80s turned into this massive empire.
Right.
And how that empire rotted from the inside out because of a $2.7 billion accounting scandal. Yeah. And then, and this is the part that I think often gets overlooked, how they pulled off surprisingly successful turnaround that actually saved the business.
It's a story that has everything. I mean, we've got a fleet of corporate jets. We have a futuristic digital hospital that never actually opened.
The old white elephant.
We've got world-famous sports surgeons, and then we have executives literally running to the FBI because they were terrified of going to jail.
It really is the Wild West of corporate healthcare. Mm-hmm. But to understand how we got to the fraud and how we got to that standing ovation, we have to go back to the very beginning. We have to look at the origin story.
Because before the crimes, there was a legitimate idea.
There was actually a very legitimate, very smart business idea.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock. It's 1983. Our main character, Richard Scrushy, is working as a vice president at a company called LifeMark Corporation.
LifeMark was a publicly traded hospital company. Pretty standard stuff for the time.
But Scrushy is looking around, and he has one of those classic aha moments. He sees a huge gap in the market.
And to really appreciate this gap, You have to understand what was happening in healthcare in the early 1980s. The whole landscape was shifting dramatically under everyone's feet.
What was driving that shift?
In a nutshell, the federal government, they had just introduced this new payment system called diagnosis-related groups, or DRGs.
DRGs. Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
Well, before DRGs, hospitals got paid for, every service they provided. The longer you stayed, the more tests they ran, the more money they made.
So there was an incentive to keep you there.
A huge incentive. But DRGs changed all that. Suddenly, the government said, look, for a heart attack, we will pay you a single flat fee. That's it. All of a sudden, hospitals were under immense pressure to cut costs. The old model of keeping patients in expensive acute care beds for weeks was just becoming unsustainable.
So the days of checking into a hospital for a minor issue and staying for 2 weeks were officially over.
They were over. Because every single day a patient sat in that hospital bed, it was costing the hospital money from that flat fee. And Scrushy noticed something really specific about physical therapy and rehabilitation in this new environment.
What did he see?
He saw that the demand for physical therapy was absolutely booming. Medical technology was getting better. It was saving more lives. People were surviving strokes, car accidents, heart attacks, but they needed rehab to recover their function.
So more survivors meant more demand for rehab.
Exactly. But, and here's the key insight, doing that rehab inside a traditional hospital in that acute care setting was incredibly expensive. You're paying for the overhead of an emergency room, an ICU, specialized surgeons, even if the patient just needs to learn to walk again on a treadmill.
So Scrushy's idea was simple but kind of revolutionary for the time. Take it out of the hospital.
Precisely. Move that service to an outpatient setting. If you can offer those same physical therapy services in a standalone facility, it's just far more cost-effective.
You strip away all the hospital overhead.
You strip it all away. You focus entirely on the therapy. And it creates this win-win situation. The patients get the care they need in a more convenient setting. The insurance system saves a ton of money. And the provider, in this case, Scrushy's future company, can run a very, very profitable business with high margins.
It's a classic business arbitrage. Provide the same service, but with a much lower cost basis. So he takes this idea, and in 1984, he incorporates a company called Amcare, Inc.
Amcare. It sounds a bit generic, doesn't it? Like a brand of bandages or something.
It doesn't quite scream future Fortune 500 company? But he didn't do it alone. He had 4 co-founders. They scraped together $50,000 in seed money. And get this. Scrushy himself put in the most, and his contribution was $25,000.
A $25,000 investment. Just keep that number in your head for a minute, because we're talking about a company that would eventually be worth billions of dollars. That is a staggering initial return on investment.
I'll say. And they also got about $1 million from Citicorp Venture Capital, so they have some real cash to get started. They opened their first facility in Little Rock, Arkansas in early '84, then a second one back home in Birmingham.
And Scrushy is the chairman and CEO right from the get-go. He's the engine. He's the one pushing the pace.
Now, pretty quickly, they realized Amcare is a bit bland. So in 1985, they changed the name to Health South Rehabilitation Corporation.
Which was a much smarter move. Health South sounds established. It sounds institutional. It gives it a sense of place and permanence.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been around for 50 years already. And that new name set them up for that IPO we mentioned at the start.
The 1986 IPO on the NASDAQ.
Right, that's where we got the standing ovation. But then right after that, Scrushy does something that really puts them on the map. He pivots. Or maybe expands is the better word.
He expands the scope, absolutely. They started in outpatient. These are the clinics where you go for an hour of therapy and then you go home. But in 1986, they purchased their first inpatient rehabilitation hospital.
Okay, so now they actually have beds. They're keeping patients overnight.
Correct. And this moves them way up the healthcare food chain. Inpatient rehab is for more serious cases.
Yeah.
People who need 24-hour nursing care, along with their intensive therapy. But the real game changer comes a few years later, in 1989.
What happens then?
They move their stock listing from the NASDAQ to the New York Stock Exchange, the big leagues, and they buy a very specific hospital in Birmingham called South Highlands Hospital.
And they rename it Health South Medical Center.
And this wasn't just any old community hospital. This purchase marked their big entrance into acute care, but with a very, very specific focus: orthopedics.
And this is where that cool factor comes into play. Because when you talk about orthopedics in Birmingham, Alabama, or really anywhere in the sports world in the 90s, you are talking about one name.
Dr. James Andrews.
The surgeon to the stars. I mean, Michael Jordan, Bo Jackson, Jack Nicklaus, Troy Aikman. You name a super athlete from that era, if they blew out a knee or tore an elbow, they were probably getting on a plane to Birmingham to see Dr. Andrews.
He was the guy. By buying this hospital, Health South immediately affiliated itself with the Alabama Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center. So suddenly, Health South wasn't just a place where your grandma went to recover from a hip replacement.
No, it was now associated with the American Sports Medicine Institute. It was associated with elite performance.
It was an absolute branding coup. It was brilliant. It linked the Health South brand to success, vitality, and high-performance professional sports. They even developed partnerships with other top surgeons, like Dr. Frank Joby in Los Angeles, the man who literally invented Tommy John surgery for baseball pitchers.
So all of a sudden, going to a Health South facility didn't feel like going to a regular hospital. It felt like going to a high-end training camp.
Exactly. And Scrushy understood this intuitively. He understood that healthcare is also a consumer product. Brand matters. Perception matters immensely.
So by the end of the 80s, they are on a roll. They have 50 facilities by 1990. They're making $400 million in revenue by 1992. But then comes the 90s. And if the 80s were about the launch, the 90s were about, well, world domination.
This is the empire building phase.
Yeah.
And the strategy was unbelievably aggressive. In business, we call this a roll-up strategy.
A roll-up. Can you explain what that means for us?
A roll-up is when a company sets out to acquire as many smaller, independent companies in the same industry as possible. The idea is to consolidate a very fragmented market.
So if there are thousands of little mom-and-pop rehab clinics out there,
You buy them all, or as many as you can. You become the giant. The strategy was basically eat or be eaten, and Health South was doing all the eating.
they just started buying everything in sight.
The real milestone year was 1993. In late 93, they made a massive move. They acquired 28 inpatient rehab hospitals and 45 outpatient facilities from a company called National Medical Enterprise.
That sounds like a big deal.
It was huge. That single acquisition more than doubled the size of the company overnight. In one transaction, Health South became the nation's largest provider of both inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation.
They became the category killer, like the Home Depot or Walmart of rehab.
A perfect analogy. And they did not stop there. In 1994, they bought another company called ReLife. Then they dropped the word rehabilitation from their corporate name and just became Health South Corporation.
Which is a signal, right? It says we are doing more than just rehab now.
Precisely. They started diversifying aggressively. In 94, they bought Diagnostic Health Corporation, so now they're in the diagnostic imaging business, MRIs, CT scans, X-rays.
Okay.
In 1995, they bought Surgical Health Corporation,
So surgery centers.
outpatient surgery centers. Then, just 1 month later, they bought NovaCare's rehab hospital business. And then, we're still in 1995, they dropped $1.2 billion to acquire surgical care affiliates.
$1.2 billion. That's real money, even today.
Yes. And that deal instantly made them the largest provider of outpatient surgery in the entire country.
This pace is just relentless. They're buying occupational health businesses like Redicare. They're buying competitors. They're buying everything.
By 1999, the numbers are just staggering. Health South had over 2,000 facilities. They were in all 50 states, plus the UK, Australia, Puerto Rico, Canada, even Saudi Arabia. They were truly a global healthcare empire.
I want to pause on this strategy for a second. Why buy all these different things? Why surgery and diagnostics and rehab? What was the logic?
A logic was all about leverage and what we call vertical integration. Think about it from the patient's perspective, from their journey through the system. Let's say you get injured playing softball on a weekend. You might need an MRI to diagnose the injury. Well, Health South owns the diagnostic center. The doctor says you need minor surgery to fix it. Health South owns the outpatient surgery center.
And then you need physical therapy to recover.
And Health South owns the rehab clinic. They capture the revenue at every single step of your care. They keep the patient inside the Health South ecosystem.
That's powerful.
It's incredibly powerful. And because they were the largest provider in every single one of those lines of business, they had immense negotiating power with the insurance companies. If you're a big insurer like Blue Cross, you basically had to have Health South in your network. They were just too big to ignore.
It sounded like the perfect business model. They seemed unstoppable.
On the surface, yes. It looked perfect. But when you grow that fast, when you are that ambitious, sometimes the ambition starts to outpace the reality.
What do you mean?
Well, when you acquire that many companies that quickly, the integration is a complete nightmare. You're trying to merge dozens of different computer systems, different corporate cultures, different accounting practices. It gets incredibly messy very fast.
And it's amidst all this chaotic growth that we see this physical manifestation of that hubris. In 2001,
The digital hospital.
the digital hospital. This was Scrushy's ultimate vision of the future. Health South announced they were partnering with Oracle Corporation to build the world's first all-digital acute care hospital.
And they actually started building it. A massive 13-story structure on 19 acres of prime real estate right next to their corporate headquarters in Birmingham. It was meant to be the jewel in the crown of the empire.
What did all-digital even mean?
It meant bedside touchscreens for patients,
Yeah.
automated drug dispensing, maybe even robots delivering meals. It was supposed to be the hospital of the 21st century. A paperless, seamless, high-tech marvel.
A monument to Health South's dominance and innovation.
But as we often see in history, monument building often comes right before the fall of the empire. Construction on that hospital was halted just 2 years later. It sat there, an empty steel skeleton, for years. A perfect symbol of ambition hitting a brick wall.
And that brick wall was the year 2002.
This is where the first cracks start to appear. And it's fascinating because it didn't start with a huge explosion. It started with a suspicion.
So set the scene for us. It's 2002. The stock is still flying high. Scrushy is a corporate celebrity. But then in May and again in July of 2002, Richard Scrushy sells a very large amount of his company stock.
Which, in isolation, isn't necessarily illegal. Executives sell stock all the time to diversify their portfolios or buy a new boat. But the timing here was, let's just say, was suspicious.
Because right after he sells all that stock, in August 2002, the company makes a surprise announcement. They announce a huge shortfall in earnings, to the tune of $175 million.
And markets absolutely hate surprises, especially bad ones. The stock gets hammered. And naturally, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, starts asking some pointed questions.
Their question being, did Scrushy know about this $175 million shortfall when he sold all his stock back in May and July?
Exactly. So it starts as a classic insider trading investigation. The SEC is looking to see if Scrushy dumped his shares because he knew bad news was on the way.
That's a serious crime for sure, but it's a specific kind of crime.
But they had no idea what was really going on. They were pulling on a single loose thread, not realizing it was attached to a bomb.
They really didn't. This is the big twist in the story. The SEC was investigating a $175 million earnings miss. They had no idea that the entire financial foundation of the company was a complete and utter lie.
So how did the truth finally come out? Because usually these things drag on for years. The lawyers get involved. Everyone denies everything.
It came out because of raw fear, and specifically fear of a brand new law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Okay, let's unpack that. Sarbanes-Oxley. We hear that term thrown around in business news, and it's usually followed by a groan from an accountant. But what did it actually mean for the guys at Health South? Well, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX as it's known, was passed in 2002. It was a direct response to those massive frauds we mentioned earlier, like Enron and WorldCom.
Right. Those scandals had wiped out billions of dollars of retirement savings. People were furious.
Congress was furious.
Yeah.
The public was furious. So they passed this law to completely change the rules of the game for corporate executives.
And what was the key change?
Before SOX, a CEO or a CFO could often claim ignorance. They could say, oh, I had no idea the accountants were cooking the books. I just sign off on the big picture stuff. But SOX made it so that top executives had to personally certify the accuracy of their company's financial statements.
Personally certified.
Yes. And if they certified statements that turned out to be false, they could go to prison for up to 20 years.
Wow. Okay, so suddenly it's not just a corporate fine or getting fired. It's real hard jail time. It made them personally liable.
Exactly. The plausible deniability was gone. And that change absolutely terrified the executives at Health South. In early 2003, 2 executive officers who knew about the fraud, who had been participating in it for years, realized they just couldn't keep signing these false papers. The risk was suddenly too high. The new law had raised the stakes to a life-or-death level, professionally speaking.
So, terrified that the whole scheme would be exposed and they would be the ones left holding the bag, they did something drastic.
They went to the FBI. They turned themselves in. And apparently they did it separately, without knowing the other was doing it. They walked into the FBI offices to confess their involvement and try to cut a deal to save themselves.
That is just incredible. The SEC is over here looking for insider trading. And meanwhile, the company's own executives are walking into the FBI saying, "Hi, we've been cooking the books for 7 years."
And once those two started talking, the floodgates just opened. It was revealed that the $175 million shortfall they had announced back in August wasn't a real shortfall at all. It was actually a cover story.
A cover story for what?
They were trying to unwind fraud. They were trying to intentionally lower Wall Street's expectations so they wouldn't have to keep lying by such a large amount every quarter. They knew they couldn't keep inflating the numbers forever, so they were trying to orchestrate a soft landing.
But the hole they had dug was just too deep.
Way too deep. The full investigation revealed that from 1996 all the way to 2003, the company had committed accounting fraud totaling $2.7 billion.
$2.7 billion. That is just a staggering number. I mean, how do you even fake that much money? How does that work mechanically?
Well, the accusation was that Scrushy and his inner circle of executives, a group the insiders sometimes called the family, would direct employees to report false earnings. And the method was surprisingly crude.
How so?
They would meet every quarter to review the preliminary earnings reports. They would look at what the company actually earned, and then they'd look at what Wall Street analysts expected them to earn.
Let's say Wall Street expects them to make $1 a share in profit.
Right. And if the real internal numbers showed they only made, say, 70 cents a share, there was a 30-cent gap. And Scrushy would reportedly look at his CFO and accountants and say one simple thing: fix it.
Just fix this.
Fix it. And so the accountants, the family, would go back to their desks and literally invent revenue to fill that gap. They had nicknames for it. They called the fake entries dirt or pixie dust.
Pixie dust.
Yes. And they would find obscure line items on the balance sheet, things like contractual adjustments or patient refunds, accounts that auditors might not scrutinize as heavily, and they would just type in new numbers. They would add a few million here, a few million there, until the bottom line number magically matched the Wall Street expectation.
Because they were literally just making up numbers every quarter to keep the stock price from falling.
Yes. It was a massive, systematic effort to deceive investors.
Uh-huh.
And one of the smarter things they did, if you can call it that, was they made thousands of tiny fraudulent entries instead of one big one. That made it much harder for the auditors at Ernst & Young to catch.
The fallout from this revelation must have been immediate and catastrophic.
It was incredibly swift. On November 4th, 2003, a federal grand jury indicted Richard Scrushy on 85 counts, including fraud and money laundering.
What happened to the company itself?
The company was in absolute chaos. It was immediately delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. It was kicked out of the S&P 500 index. The stock price, which had once been over $30 a share, plummeted to just pennies. The board of directors fired the entire executive management team. Scrushy was out.
And that digital hospital construction?
Stopped cold. The crane stopped moving that very day.
Now, here's an important distinction you pointed out earlier. Scrushy and other executives were indicted, but the company itself, Health South as a corporate entity, was not indicted. Why was that?
Because the new board of directors made a very smart decision. Once they realized the extent of the fraud, they decided to cooperate fully with the investigators. They opened the doors. They said, "Come in. We will help you find everything. We will not hide a single document."
They turn on their old bosses.
Completely. And because they cooperated, the government decided to pursue the individuals who were responsible, not the corporate entity itself. That single decision probably saved the company from total destruction and liquidation.
But even so, a $2.7 billion fraud. Most companies would just declare bankruptcy. They would fold. They'd be gone forever. Why didn't Health South die?
This is, for me, the most fascinating part of the entire business case. Why didn't they go bankrupt? Because, ironically, the underlying business model was actually sound.
The actual business of rehabbing patients.
Exactly. The fraud was about inflating the earnings to make the company look better than it really was. But the core business helping stroke victims learn to walk again, helping athletes recover from surgery, that business was real, and it was generating actual positive cash flow.
So they were making money, just not nearly as much as they were lying about.
Correct. This wasn't a Ponzi scheme where there was no underlying business at all. There was a real, profitable, and necessary business underneath all the lies. A top-tier restructuring firm, Alvarez & Marsal, came in, they looked at the real books, and they realized, wait a minute, this company has cash flow. If we manage this correctly, we don't need to file for Chapter 11.
So they survived the initial crash, but now they had to rebuild everything. They had to clean up this colossal mess.
And this begins the turnaround phase of the story. It starts with completely new leadership. In 2004, the board brings in a man named Jay Grinney as the new president and CEO.
And where did he come from?
He came from HCA Hospital Corporation of America, one of the biggest and most respected hospital operators in the country. He was a seasoned, no-nonsense operator. He was the complete opposite of a showman like Scrushy. He was a grinder. And he brought in a new CFO, John Workman. Their job was just to stabilize the ship.
And a big part of stabilizing the ship had to be changing the corporate culture. Because under Scrushy, the culture was, let's just say, extravagant.
To put it mildly, Scrushy lived an incredibly flashy lifestyle. And that permeated the whole company. So one of the very first things the new management team did was symbolic but very meaningful. They sold the fleet of corporate jets.
They had a whole fleet, not just one jet.
They had multiple jets. It was a huge symbol of the excess of the Scrushy era. Getting rid of them sent a powerful message to employees and to Wall Street. The party is over. We are here to work and fix this.
And they also started selling off major assets, right?
They had to. They needed to simplify the business and raise cash. They sold that Southside Medical Center to UAB, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. That officially ended their big venture into acute care orthopedics. They also closed another hospital called Metro West.
And then between 2006 and 2007, they did something really drastic. They basically dismantled the entire empire that Scrushy had spent the 90s building.
We can call this period the Great Divestiture. The strategy was essentially shrink to grow. They looked at that massive vertically integrated empire, the surgery centers, the diagnostic clinics, the outpatient rehab, the inpatient hospitals. And they asked themselves a simple question. What are we actually best at? Where's the real sustainable value in this company?
And the answer they came to was inpatient rehabilitation.
Exactly. That was the core. So they decided to sell everything else. In 2007, they sold the entire outpatient business to a competitor, Select Medical. They sold the massive surgery center division to a private equity firm, PPG Capital.
Which, interestingly, was spun back out as Surgical Care Affiliates again.
Yes, the names often cycle back in the world of private equity. And they sold the diagnostic imaging division to another firm called the Gores Group.
They even sold the real estate, right? The headquarters and that empty digital hospital.
They sold it all in 2008 to a real estate firm. They then leased back the headquarters building they needed, but they finally got that empty hospital off their books.
So by 2007, 2008, what is actually left of Health South?
What's left is a lean, mean-focused machine. They were back to their roots. They were almost purely an inpatient rehabilitation company. They had stripped away all the distractions, all the flash and sizzle, and focused entirely on their core competency.
And this strategy worked. They managed to get relisted on the New York Stock Exchange in 2006. That must have felt like a huge victory.
It was a massive validation. It meant that the markets, the investors, they trusted them again. It was a signal that they had survived the fraud, paid their penance, and had emerged as a viable public company once more.
So that brings us into the modern era of the company. They've survived, they've stabilized, they've shrunk. Now it was time to start growing again.
But this time, the growth was going to be disciplined. It was focused. So from 2014 onwards, they started acquiring again, but they stayed squarely in their lane.
In 2014, they made a big purchase, Encompass Home Health and Hospice.
Which made perfect strategic sense. Home health is a natural extension of inpatient rehab. A patient leaves your rehab hospital, they go home, but they still need care. It fits the continuum of care perfectly.
And then in 2015, they bought Reliant Hospital Partners for $730 million, which added another 11 rehab hospitals to their network.
Right, expanding their footprint, but sticking to what they know best.
Then in 2018 came what was probably the final symbolic break from the past, the name change.
Health South officially became Encompass Health Corporation.
Why the change? I mean, everyone in healthcare knew the name Health South. It was a powerful brand, for better or worse.
It was, but it carried so much baggage. It was forever linked to Richard Scrushy and the scandal. By rebranding to Encompass Health, they accomplished two things. First, they integrated the Encompass name from their big home health acquisition, showing a unified company.
Right.
And second, and maybe more importantly, they signaled to the world that this was a new day. It was a clean slate. The past was the past.
Encompass from the new home health side and health from the legacy name.
Exactly. It was a bridge from the past to the future.
And they haven't stopped evolving. Just in 2022, they made another big strategic move.
They did. They spun off that home health and hospice business they had bought as a brand new, separate, publicly traded company called Inhabit.
So now, today, what is Encompass Health?
Today, they are a pure-play inpatient rehabilitation provider. That is their sole focus. They do one thing, and they aim to do it better than anyone else in the country.
Let's talk about the patients for a second. Who are they actually helping day to day? When we say inpatient rehab, what does that really look like?
We were talking about patients recovering from very serious, often life-altering medical events. The biggest category is stroke, but also other neurological disorders, major cardiac and pulmonary conditions, traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, complex orthopedic injuries, amputations.
So these are not people coming in for a sprained ankle. These are people who need intensive round-the-clock therapy just to regain their independence.
That's exactly right. It's critical, life-changing work.
And it seems the market recognizes that they're doing it well. The turnaround is so complete that they're winning awards now.
They are. Fortune has ranked them on their world's most admired companies list. Modern Healthcare magazine has called them one of the best places to work.
To go from a $2.7 billion fraud to a most admired company, that is quite the arc.
It really is one of the most remarkable turnaround stories in modern corporate history.
So let's try to wrap this incredible story up. We started with a $50,000 startup built on a really smart idea. It grew into a dominant, globe-spanning empire that owned everything from surgery to diagnostics. It collapsed spectacularly under the weight of one of the biggest frauds we'd ever seen. It almost died. And then, through disciplined management and a painful restructuring, it stripped itself down, survived, and rebuilt itself into the focused industry leader it is today.
It's the ultimate corporate survival story.
Before we go, I want to go back for a moment to that digital hospital, that empty skeleton.
It's such a haunting image, isn't it?
It stood empty for years on a major highway in Birmingham, Highway 280. Just a steel frame against the sky, a monument to failure. But eventually, it was sold. It was finished by another company, Community Health Systems, and it's now the Grandview Medical Center. So it is a working hospital today.
It is. But it's not the one Richard Scrushy envisioned. It has a different legacy now.
And I think that brings us to the biggest takeaway here for me. The story of Encompass Health is really a powerful lesson in distinguishing between a business and its management.
That is the absolute key point. The management Scrushy and his inner circle was corrupt. They were driven by greed, by ego, by the pressure to keep the stock price soaring. But the business, the actual act of providing rehabilitation services to people in need, was solid. It was necessary. It created real value.
And because that underlying business had real value, it was able to outlive the corruption of its creators.
Exactly. The need for rehab didn't go away just because the CEO was a crook.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our current age of tech unicorns and nonstop hype, how often do we confuse a charismatic CEO with a solid, sustainable business model?
We do it all the time. We fall in love with the pitch, the vision, the standing ovation. But at the end of the day, boring, reliable cash flow usually wins out over flashy promises.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. Does the boring work of rehabilitation actually hold more intrinsic value than the flashy work of empire building? I think the story of Encompass Health proves that, in the long run, it absolutely does.
Couldn't agree more.
Something to think about the next time you see a CEO getting a standing ovation. That's it for this deep dive into Encompass Health. Thanks for listening.